You have been made with a specific purpose and with specific gifts to accomplish your mission. This is Requip, and I am Scott Schneiderman. Stay tuned to gain insights that will help you be more successful in doing the work of ministry. All right, now I just want to welcome, we have a special guest. Usually it's me pontificating, explaining a bunch of things, talking about things from the Bible, and we still, as Requip, we want to be a supplement for the local church, but wanted to bring an outside guest in that doing some great things, have a new book coming out, and just talking about leadership, and I think that can weave into discipleship. Ultimately, we want to help the local church, but I just want to welcome Scott Wozniak, and we have the dueling Scotts going on, so we're pretty excited about that. So I just want to kind of open it up to you. You know, people maybe aren't familiar with you from our audience. Just want to kind of welcome you and just say, hey, thanks for coming. And anything you want to say about your background? I know you've done a lot of leadership, work consulting, wrote books, all sorts of things. So just go ahead and whatever you want to share.
Yeah, man, this is a topic that's a big passion of mine, as you and I talked about getting ready for this, because it's a part of my story, man. So I'll give you the short version of the story, but especially highlight why I think what you're doing is so important and what matters. So actually, my first field had nothing to do with ministry or leadership. I grew up on stage as a child performer. I did my first speaking role when I was 4. I was winning regional competitions by 10. I got on an NBC Christmas special in high school. I did tons of shows. Everyone's like, you got the gifts, go do this. So I went and got a degree in musical theater performance and started doing professional work and woke up in my early 20s going, I don't actually want to do this. I liked it. It wasn't not at all bad. I had some great friends in that world, but man, I also grew up in a home that loved Jesus and met God early and thought that was awesome. And so I started doing church work on the side, just kind of volunteer with youth and do the summer camp thing. And honestly, I had a blast. And I thought, man, I want to do this more than I want to do this performance thing. And even though I'm making money and doing all this stuff cool here, in my heart, I want to make a difference over here. So took a total left turn, went into ministry, got a seminary program and worked at churches, worked at Focus on the Family for a while. It was one of my first jobs. I kind of, my transition time was like, hey, I got all these stage skills. Maybe I can use them for the kingdom. So I was a backstage guy for their conference tour. We went around and filled stadiums. I learned a ton, but, worked for Focus and to local churches and parachurch groups like K-Life and Kennecott camps and all sorts of wonderful folks. And between the several churches and several parachurches, honestly, this is where the story starts becoming leadership and gets me to what I do today. Let me put it this way. I worked for some really nice guys who loved God and were terrible leaders.
Right.
Like they meant well. They're still friends of mine. Like they're good people. I was talking to a mentor and I didn't even have words for it, Scott. I was like, it's not a moral failure. There's no theological problems. Like they're not even mean. Like I like these people. What is going on is a nightmare. We can't do this and this problem. And so they gave me a business book. And I'll be honest, at first I was like, oh, no, listen, I'm a creative ministry guy. Like I don't do this accounting thing. Right. And he's like, just read the book. I stayed up till 2 a.m. reading that book like it was a novel when I finally cracked it. I finally had words for the stuff I was wrestling with. And it was leadership and strategy and systems and people development and decision making and all this stuff that was like, oh, that wasn't in my Greek and Hebrew class. No. We didn't cover this in church history, which maybe we should have. There's probably a lot of great leadership lessons in church history, but we didn't. And so started learning for myself and grew a ton, got a coach, going to conferences, doing all this stuff. And so started becoming a decent leader, started to figure this out. Some of the ministries I worked for had great leaders, started being mentored. And I was shaking my fist at God one day, right? It's not right. The kingdom's held back for bad leaders. Somebody should do something. You know, it's like the Holy Spirit's just elbowing me. Yes, somebody should do something. So, man, I think that's my calling. It's definitely a passion, is to come alongside leaders. I think this is my ministry. How do I help them actually realize the vision God put on their heart with good systems and strategy and people develop leadership, right? I mean, like it's this non-trivial thing. And it's all through the Bible now, right? Now I look back and I'm like, forehead slap. That is everywhere. But yeah, I didn't see it, and none of my early teachers taught me about it. So,
yeah.
Okay. Trying to figure out, how do I make a career out of this? How do you do this full time and not as a side hobby? And so I went back to school, got a master's in business because it was the only place I could get a leadership program. And then one of my professors, my second year, asked me to start doing some training and coaching with him on the side for his company. And I started working with not just ministries, but business leaders. And honestly, kind of had my second big forehead slap of like, oh, there's a lot of ministry that's happening in this context too. Because up until then, I was like, church only, man. Like, that's all I do. And so it didn't hurt that then some of my friends from high school said, hey, can you help us with our company? And those friends happened to be the Kathy family that owns Chick-fil-a. So Andrew, who's the CEO, we went to high school together. And so I know the whole family. I was at an event celebrating a big retirement party and hanging out with a bunch of them yesterday. So they're friends. But back then I was like, yeah, hey, good luck with your little restaurant company, right? I'm going to go do cool ministry. I hope you guys make it. Yeah, they're going to make it.
They're doing all right.
Yeah. So, and really what they had me start thinking seriously about for the first time was all the ministry that happens as a leader in an organization. They're like, yes, we're trying to do things for the world, but that's really not their main mission. Is they're not trying to make public statements. They see the way they care for these young people in the headquarters and in all the franchise locations, that heart to pour into people, develop them like that. So they sold me on it. I went and worked for them for a while. Then I went to launch my own consulting company, and now that's what I do. The first client to hire me when I left Chick-fil-a was Chick-fil-a. So I keep working with them, but now we work with a lot of folks, including part of why I left was I get to go directly work with churches again. And so I still do this a lot. I feel like what God's called me, the way I like to describe it is I'm called to be Merlin to the Arthurs of the world, right? Like, you got a vision for Camelot. Hey, let me come behind you and kind of help give you the wisdom and tools and maybe even a magic sword, right? And we're going to help you figure this out because the world needs Camelot. God's called you to do this. And and maybe we can get into the rest of the content here, but like, my story is that, man, a good heart and a big vision are necessary, but not sufficient for really having fruitful ministry.
Yeah. No, that's good.
You got to have leadership and disciplines and people skills. And like, some of this other stuff is non-bonus, like it's core, or you don't actually get to fulfill the ministry God's called you to.
Yeah.
So that's what I do now.
Yeah, I'm so glad that you're talking about that. And, that's kind of one of the driving forces behind why I started Requip Ministries, because I spent a ton of time in the Marine Corps, where I learned pretty much everything was leadership. Yeah. And then went to seminary, and none of it was leadership. And it's like, wait, this is the most important organization.
Marine Corps, that's pretty important, right? Let's keep us safe and healthy and alive. Yeah. But if anything could nudge that out, you'd slide ministry in there. Yeah. And then we don't talk about leadership. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And so, and everybody talks about, Jesus is the greatest leader and all that, but it's then we only talk about the theological things and divorce that from leadership. But we're talking about, we're guiding people, we're leading people, we're making disciples who make disciples, and that is leadership. Of course, you have to have the right theology, you have to have all that kind of stuff.
Absolutely, because let's put it this way: leadership. One of the metaphors I'll use for it is it's the vehicle, the engine that's going to drive you there. Now, your theology makes sure you're driving in the right direction. Yeah, right?
That's good. Yeah.
I have seen highly skilled leaders who led us down the wrong road. We all got there and loved it and did it with high performance, but you also can't say, man, we have this great vision, but we don't even have wheels, let alone an engine, right? Like that truck's not going to move. Yeah. 100%. Theology matters, but it's not the whole equation.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's, so you're kind of almost probably answering the question. One of the questions I have to start off with is, what's the biggest problem you see? But maybe if there's a way, okay, it's leadership. Is there something to refine that? If you could kind of say, this is the biggest issue I see that, your content, your consulting books and all that can help with that, help churches, help Christians that maybe we're part of the church, even though we're not, leading necessarily. Of course, you're always leading, but maybe you're in business,
not
you're in
formal position.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, man. I'll kind of refine a little bit, but I do think this is one of the biggest gaps holding the church back. There are a couple others that aren't leadership related. Sadly, there's a whole sweep of churches that more and more are moving away from fundamentally biblical based teaching, right? It's culture commentary, and they might sprinkle a verse in. That's cool, but nothing's more transformative than the Bible, right? Like we've got to stay. But absolutely. But let's assume we're doing that, right? So you get to the other side, the theology's right. Then what? Yeah, this leadership gap, so I've worked with a lot of pastors now, and I see there's two or three kind of common patterns. I see the myth or the mindset that gets them stuck. One is like, listen, if I was truly a great man of God or woman of God, then the Holy Spirit would just tell me what to do, and I don't need all these other people and and the solution is just more time in my prayer closet. But let me be clear. We should probably all spend more time in our prayer closet. Yeah. But that is not what the Bible shows as the pattern for how the leaders of the Bible actually got their stuff done. Yeah, they did that, and they brought a group of folks around him. I mean, as far back as Moses, it's like, no, you don't do this all on your own. Yep. To Jesus. Look, if anyone can claim, I don't need input from others, right?
He actually doesn't need us, but
he legit didn't need us. And he still involved his disciples in the conversation. Hey, look, the 5 loaves and fishes. Like, hey, where do you think we should get some food? Wait, shouldn't he just go sit in his prayer moment and then just tell everybody? No, the process of doing it together, bringing in teams. And so they get this myth that if I was just godly enough, then we would always make the perfect decisions that I got. Right. And I think God deliberately puts limits on our knowledge, doesn't let us see the whole picture because he wants us to be a body that functions together. The parts need each other, right? Right. You can't say, I don't need you. I'm the head. I got this whole thing figured out. I'm sorry. God may have appointed you called you to be the leader of this ministry, but what that leader does is should lead like Jesus. And what did Jesus do? He took the humble seat and put everyone else in the position of well, what do you think? And why don't you try this? And what should we do with this fish? And why don't you go minister? Yeah. Send the 2x2 out, right? So this, again, that's the number one myth I see is well, if I was just godly enough, if I could just pray a little more, then I would always know the answer and I could always make, and it's, this benevolent dictator, maybe the Christian version is the godly dictator, right? If I could just be godly enough, then I could make all the right decrees.
I actually, let me jump in here because I think a little while back I spoke on one of my podcasts was sort of about this, and you're almost there's this idea out there, and it's around in some circles. Ironically, it's called the Moses model. And it's really just a misinterpretation of what Moses actually did. But the idea is that, Moses, he went away with God. He got a download, which is all true. Sure. And then he comes back and then does great things, but leaves out all the things of what we're called to do. And what he actually did was to mobilize a lot of people. Yeah.
Well, the real story is, right, for those who know, he did that. He came down and they didn't follow any of it. Right? They were golden calf and totally wrecked. And he went back and came back again. And then he tried to manhandle it. That's my term, right? I'm going to make it happen with my force of will and my spiritual wisdom. And it wore him out. And the people still weren't fully implementing it. And it's not until his father-in-law comes along and says, you cannot do this on your own. Appoint people, delegate authority, set up stuff. And then finally, the people of Israel start actually living out the law that God gave them. And so how ironic that they would call that the Moses model when the very story of Moses is, look what happens when you try to do it all by yourself, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And I've seen that's what gets people burned out the most in ministry is you feel important for a time because, hey, everybody, I'm a gatekeeper. Everybody's got to come to me. I've got all the answers. This is great. It feels good for a little while, but you get burned out because it turns out we were never meant to carry that burden, just like
100%.
Moses and
Yeah.
literally everybody else. So
Yeah, and maybe another, ironically, Moses example that refutes the Moses model is the battle where he had to hold his staff over his head.
Yeah.
And he just physically, you can't do that. I don't care how God, it's not like Moses, and the Bible doesn't imply that Moses like stopped believing, lost faith. It's like his arms literally got too tired.
That's good, yeah.
And so like, well, yeah, the Moses model will have your arms burn out and you'll be unable to carry the staff for a little while. It looks really cool on your arm. Yeah.
That's good.
Excuse me. There's even another layer to this. So it's not just bad for you, the minister. It robs the people of growth and development.
Exactly. That's
Man, I used to literally like say my dream job would be like to have a cool little desk and a nice office and comfy chairs. And then I'd get wise enough and grow enough that I would sit on my side of the desk and all day long people could just come and bring their scenarios to me and I could just dispense God's wisdom to them and how great this would be. And what I have since learned is that if you want to solve a problem, the most efficient, effective way to solve a problem is for an expert to come in and tell you how to solve the problem. But if you want to develop people, that is the least efficient way to do it. Because what everyone learns is, oh, the solution to my problem is Scott's really smart. I mean, I should go talk to Scott. This guy knows what he's doing. Like, it doesn't matter how smart you are. They're still not growing. They're learning that you can solve their problems. When you really want to develop people, if you're trying to, if you have an urgent problem, hey, just step in as the expert, fix it. Right. But if you don't have an urgent problem, if you can afford to slow down and be less efficient on the problem side, the most impactful way to develop people is instead of telling them, you ask them things, questions. So don't give the answer, give them questions and let them wrestle with it. And what about this? And how would you see that? And well, why do you think this? And what really is going on? And what do you think the driving forces are? What options could we pursue? Well, what would success actually look like? How would we know if we won? These question asking,
it's good.
It'll take 10 times longer than if you're like, oh, listen, I know this one, just do that, right? But what happens is they walk out of there thinking differently. They walk out of there re-examining assumptions they had and processing and like making, and they own the solution. Like, wow, because it's their idea that came up with it. You know what that sounds a lot like to me? Discipleship.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Like Jesus. How many?
Jesus asked way more questions than statements he made.
Yes. Why? Because his goal was not always fix the problem. His goal was, I'm here primarily to develop these people. I got disciples. Because I'm going back to the Father and I need these people ready to run when I'm gone. And so we get this myth with the Moses model, I guess, right? It's, hey, I'm going to come in. I'm going to have all this wisdom. I could just be godly enough. I'll tell everybody the right solutions.
Yeah.
And let me say this, even if you could get that wise and godly, you would be robbing your people of the discipleship growth that comes when you take the humble seat and ask a lot of questions and empower other people to wrestle with it. That's discipleship 101. That's the supercharger that grows people's lives. That's ministry. Right. And we trying to solve all these problems and put on all this other stuff that, that becomes the block. The very thing we think is going to move us forward is the thing keeping our people from growing in their mindset, in their heart, in their faith.
Yeah. So as we continue with this, we talked about the issues and I think we're teasing into some potential opportunities, but what are some big opportunities that you could see if maybe some churches and Christians in maybe secular organizations, if they implemented some of these things, which I want to get into some of what are those things, but what are the opportunities? What could open up? What could happen if they start to develop people and be what a leader actually is?
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of folks in this scenario are massively underestimating what their people are capable of. They are afraid of people not doing it to their standard. They want excellence. They want to do a good job. Their reputation, sometimes their identity is tangled up in this all looking good, right? And they're terrified that if they let these people do things, it's not going to go well. Man, my experience is overwhelmingly, the majority of the time, you actually empower people, ask great questions, train them, you lead them, right? They they not just they'll come up with stuff you can't come up with. They'll exceed your expectations, and it just takes longer. And so you got to shift your horizon down. And this week might be less. This weekend might be a little sloppier, but even a year from now, you'll be in a significantly better place without you having to be the one to figure everything out. And so you underestimate your people. The opportunities are huge. There's not a single one. There's like everything you do could be better if you see yourself as, well, let's go biblical, right? As the equipper of the saints who do the work of the ministry rather than you who try to do all the work of all the ministry, right? And so if you shift that, like, wait, we equip the saints to do the work of ministry, then they start actually doing the work of ministry. It is amazing what the people will really do. So every single part of the ministry improves. And in business, when we talk to business leaders, every single part of the business improves. There's some fundamental human stuff. Now, we work with both ministries and businesses, and the details will look different for sure, right? The way you exercise it, apply it, but some of the fundamental human stuff on how you clearly communicate, empower them, set it up. Now, what you don't do is you don't give them a vague vision and then cut them loose and then just cross your fingers and hope it goes well, right? There's tools, there's clarity, there's systems that allow you to both support them without micromanaging them. But man, when you put the right balance in place, literally everything improves. So I'll give you a couple of tactical things that kind of lead up. If you've got a zone in your organization, you're like, we need to grow this thing. We need to improve it, either quality or size or whatever the deal is. One of my number one recommendations to leaders is, okay, find somebody else and put a leader on it. Not you, not the senior leader. Put somebody else on it. Everything improves when a true leader starts engaging. And so if you see yourself as a leader of leaders and they own all the things, one of the other kind of statements I'll say to bust myths is like, the leader's job is not to do any of the work. The leader only has one job. The leader's job is to figure out who's in charge of doing all the jobs. Now, you may pick yourself once in a while and be like, okay, I need to assign myself to that task. But that's really the core leadership function is, and as much as possible, assign everyone else. Because the more you're doing tasks, the less time you have to pour into other people. So, there's opportunity for your personal life. You have more energy in life. There's opportunity for them to grow. There's opportunity for the people you serve to actually get better quality, better experiences, better depth. Every single thing can improve when you lead well.
That's good. What are some, as you've been doing this for years, what are some things that you've seen implemented? I know every context is different and the specifics are different. Churches are different, organizations, business, everything. But there's some broad brush things that you've seen implemented, and don't give away too much because I want everybody to go to get your content and everything like that. But, a couple of things that someone could take and, I want to test this out, before I get all into it. But what are some things that I could do to implement that could work? We want results.
Okay, so the book is what we call a customer experience engine is in the book. Now, at the very beginning of the book, like chapter 1, page 2, I think it is. I say basically, hey, this applies to ministries. You just have to for just smoothness of writing. Probably the majority of our clients are business now, which honestly provides a lot of the finances allow me to do the ministry work and not charge the ministries what's they can't afford. But I put all that to say, so the language is simple. So instead of when we talk to ministries, we don't call it a customer experience engine. We call it a member discipleship engine. This is how we develop. Same deal. And the underlying pieces are the true because there's human elements here, right? Okay. And the engine, it's this diagram with gears and belts and cool stuff, right? But there's like fuel, like a gas can pouring into the engine. And this is the first part of the engine we talk about in the book. The fuel of this engine is, in the book, we call it customer insight. For ministries, we would call it member insight. Do you actually know the people you're serving? And what I find is most ministries don't have customer insight. They don't have member insight. They have member data. They know facts about them, right? They know their address because people sign up for that. And they know how often they might attend. Maybe depends on how good their attendance. They know their giving if they give, right? But they know some data points, but they don't actually know insight about them. What's going on in their world? What do they do for careers? What's their kids? Where do they come from? What's their spiritual journey like? Why do they come to your church? Let's just start with the basics, right? Not even those are advanced. Let's start with ABCs. Why did they pick you and not the one down the road? What is it that first drew them? What keeps them there? What don't they care about, but they endure because they like the other things? Do you even know what they think? And what most people have is they have data on the masses, and then a couple of squeaky wheels come complain at them every Sunday. and you think that, well, I guess that's what's going on in our congregation. It's not. And the problem is we have a passive approach here. We cross our fingers and wait for them to come tell us. By the time they tell us, it's been going on a long time, and they're only giving us the tip of the iceberg. If you really want to see the bulk of the iceberg that's under the waterline, you go ask them. And you ask them for more than just like, hey, let's update everyone's addresses this year. And again, the mistake is sometimes I've seen people flip too far to the other side and do these very long surveys and nobody will reply. So my number one tactical tool, because I love this stuff. I love the cool hype, right? Remember, this is my story. I love your vision. How do you actually do it? Dang it. So one of my favorite things is instead of sending a big, long survey, send a pulse survey, like a pulse, right? A heartbeat pulse. And so for churches or other ministries, I often recommend a monthly, at most quarterly, you send a survey. But it is short, man. Because the number one, I don't know. Let me put you on the spot, Scott. Do you answer all of the customer surveys that you get?
No, definitely not.
Why not? What keeps you from answering all those?
Usually they're long, and well, a big thing is I just don't really care or think it's going to matter to.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, both of those. Okay, so let's address both of those. Here's what Pulse Survey does. First, you make it super short. 2 to 4 questions. My goal is 30 seconds or less. Get in, get out. It's like 1 to 5, 1 to 10, maybe an optional comment box, right? But if they want, click, 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 done. They can do it super fast, and you say that in the email, right? Hey, we got 3 questions. It'll take you 20 seconds. We just want your insight on this topic. Would love your input. And you can do that once a month, once a quarter, and you just these tiny little pulses, and you will see a significant improvement in the response rate. People will actually answer if it's like, oh, that's easy. You don't have to care that deeply to answer a quick little guy, right? Like, fine, sure, whatever. I'll tell him my thoughts. And then that's level 1, though. Level 2 is when it gets awesome. What if we actually reply? Because I bet you have taken some of these surveys, right? At some point, you get mad enough or something, right? You finally take one. But then, I don't know, have you ever gotten a meaningful reply? Not no, the form letter,
it's usually
right?
an automatic, thanks for filling out this survey.
It means nothing, right? Like, I know you didn't.
You just know it went through. That's the only thing. Okay.
Well, what if, like, say 3 weeks later, the team reviewed it and sent a blast out again and said, hey, thanks everybody who answered. Here's one big idea we got. Or thanks for confirming that this is matter. We're going to keep or man, we're bummed to know that 18% of you were not happy with this. We're going to go, we don't know yet how, but we're going to fix that. Thanks for telling us. Some meaningful reply that says, I'm actually listening. Because otherwise, I made this big sacrifice, and it's like I threw my information in a black hole, right? Like, gee, I hope they do something. What if it takes 30 seconds or less, and then we reply, hey, we're listening to you. This matters. This becomes a radical. Now, level 3 is you don't just do this. You have somebody on your staff, somebody in the ministry, maybe even a volunteer, but doesn't have to be a big, expensive thing. Maybe it doesn't even cost any extra money. It's like, hey, Scott, you're a rock star. Why don't you just own this for the next year, right? In my company, we just call this a special assignment. And they send the survey every month. They compile the answers, and then they get to sit in the leadership team. You pick a rising leader, do some leadership development, right? Don't just do this is a double whammy. I get to learn about my members, and I get to develop a leader. So that young leader gets to take this stuff. And every month they sit down with your leadership team and they say, here's what they said. And what do you want the next set of questions to be? And you get 15 minutes of FaceTime with the team to talk about the ministry and what God's doing. And it gets really fun. You can have some standard questions you want to ask regularly, but you could also do stuff like, hey, we're going to be doing a sermon series on this. Let's ask questions about that for a couple months, and then we'll bring those answers into the sermon series. And they're like, oh man, I remember that. He's talking about it. Like ability to have real insight on what's going on in their life, to process and follow up, and you can ask questions about spiritual practice, not just demographic stuff. Like, hey, how often have you been reading your Bible this past month? Just in the last 30 days, how many times? 1 time, 0, once a week, right? Multiple times, and then everyone clicks an option, and then you can say, hey, here's what's actually our people doing. You can make it anonymous if you feel like that makes people safer. That's often an easier way to start. There's some pros and cons to having people put their names on it, but you got to only do that in a high trust scenario. So all that to say, like, forget all the other tactical things. One of the other big mistakes people make is they guess. They're like, I'm alone in my prayer closet. I'm up in the ivory tower, and I think I know what our people are doing. Why don't you just ask them? Again, let's go back to Jesus. If anyone could say, I don't need to actually ask the question, right? He gets to say that.
Yeah.
And how many times did he walk up to people and say, one of the more powerful Jesus questions in the New Testament, he comes up to a blind man and he says, what do you want me to do for you?
Yep.
Now, you might say, like, this is, pardon the pun, blindingly obvious, right? Like, I know what you want. Hello. But I think there's a profound moment where God could say, I know what you need. I'm just going to do what I know you need, right? And Jesus instead invites us in and says, what do you actually want? What do you want me to do? And we're not Jesus, but we get to be his hands and feet. Sometimes, yes, God's going to give us a word. Moses' principle doesn't mean you ignore the mountain. It's not either or, right?
Right.
But it also means even when you've got a word from God, sometimes we just ask him, hey, what is really going on? What do you care about? What are you wrestling with? What are you scared about? What's your behavior like? And you'd start getting into some totally different ministry conversations if you go from guessing to real member insight. Do you really know, or do you just have data?
Yeah, that's good. That's good. Yeah, it made me think of, Moses, he went to the mountain. But then later, Jesus shows us even more refined leadership. He took people to the mountain. He took Peter, James, and John and said, I don't need you here, but I want you here because I want to teach you something. So I love that. And then thankfully, Jesus did that. And then Peter, James, and John, and so on, a couple thousand years. And we heard the same story. We get to live that out as well. So that's awesome. That's some great insight. We've covered a lot here. Is there anything else, you want to hammer home, or, and also definitely how can people get connected with you and stay connected? And I'll definitely put all the links and everything like that in the show notes and all that. But yeah, just any kind of parting notes as we begin to wrap it up.
Yeah, I'll add one more thought. Don't do this alone. People say, there's an old saying, you probably heard it, like it's lonely at the top, or leadership is lonely. And I don't think that's true. I think the way some people do lead makes it lonely, but I don't think it's inherently lonely. Jesus said it, right? He could have gone to the mountain alone. And if you always go to the mountain alone, guess what? You're going to end up lonely, but you don't have to. And so, maybe a better analogy is the disciples. Paul, he never did this stuff alone. He always had a peer. Yeah. Find at least one person who you can get real and raw and honest. And listen, if you can get a mentor, like find a Paul, right? Find a Timothy, but also find a Barnabas. I say the coolest is if you get a great life mentor. If you can find one of those are so great. Yesterday, I was just at the retirement party. I think I mentioned this starting. I was just at the retirement party for my mentor at the Chick-fil-A headquarters, the guy who I reported to and still talk to, even though I don't work for him anymore. And years and years later, huge impact on my life. A guy named Mark Miller. He's also a leadership author, speaker, coach guy, like phenomenal. He learned a ton from him. Find a mentor. But you know what? I love Mark and I love what he's done for my life. But you know what's been even more impactful for me is I have a small group of guys that is my peer. Some of them are pastors, some of them are business guys, but we're all men who are pursuing God at a similar stage in life and intensity and giftedness. And we're saying, hey, what if we just bring our life plans to each other and we swap back and forth and we just say, what are you working on? What are you working on? I mean, everything as simple as like, what books are you reading? Oh, that's interesting. I should probably read that one too. To like, let's talk about your family and how you wrestling with what's going on with your special needs kid or your marriage challenge, and having a place we can get out of the day to day and get away. We just do it once a year. We get for a retreat, and then we do some other calls, like a quarterly call, and just catch up. It doesn't have to be a ton of time. And finding a peer. It may be you need to get out of your ministry to go do this. It may be you can find one in your ministry. Maybe my first early days, the friend that I found that did this, we clicked, and we, like, years of like, and then my friend suddenly was like, I can't even take credit for it. He did it. He was like, we keep saying these are the best conversations we have. Why don't we do this regularly? Like, why are we like waiting till we run into each other and like, that was the best 3-hour lunch, right? Like, why don't we just start doing this on purpose? And it changed my life, man. And by the way, he was living 4 states away at the time. Like it was not convenient. So we started doing phone calls and find a peer. Don't be on the mountain alone. You can do this. Now, if you want to hear any more of my stuff, I've got a podcast as well. I just started. So learning the ropes, trying to learn from guys like Scott here. We're doing great. And so you can find my podcast and my newsletter and the book and my company and all that stuff. Is the easiest way to find that is scottwozniak.com. That's www.scott, and the last name is Wozniak. So scottwozniak.com has all my links and stuff. And you can kind of see the latest. So this is my 4th book. My first book is explicitly for church leaders. And then the other 3 books are more broad leaders in multiple genres. So
everybody needs to just get the whole set. Just get them all. Definitely get the newest one. But that's going to be exciting. I'm excited what God's doing, in you and through you, and just building up people. That is close to my heart, of course, to pour into. I kind of say it as simply as this, because people hear like discipleship. I don't know. That sounds complicated. Just pour your life into somebody else. Whatever God's given you, just give it. What I've noticed is it's almost like a spigot. Once you open it up, all of a sudden more water just keeps flowing to you also.
It actually, like, the more you do, the more you get. Like, it gets really cool. Yeah. So that's great.
That's awesome.
Thanks, brother. And thanks for what you're doing. We need more of this. There's a I think there's a lot of men and women who have a heart to truly serve God, and they just don't know how to make that happen. You want to talk about lonely frustration? It's having a big vision and not having the skills to make that come to life. Yeah. So, man, the world needs what you're doing. Thanks, brother. Keep it up.
Love it. Well, thanks for coming on, and I hope you have a great launch of your book and everything like that, and we'll direct people to it. So thanks for coming on. You've been listening to Requip Ministries, and thanks so much for listening. And go ahead, head on over to our website for more resources. That's requip.org, re-quip.org. And you can always connect with me on social media as well. And until next time, we hope you follow the command to always be prepared for action.